You have to have kind of an appreciation for what certain video games do differently than others, which I think is what made games like LittleBigPlanet stand out. Figuring out what are the games that inspire you, that are making you feel like I want to do this as a job. What is it about these games that make me feel inspired?
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of GameLogic Behind the Games. Today I welcome on Tanner Corder from Squanch Games. How are you, Tanner?
I'm doing great.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on today. Whereabouts in the world are you at the moment?
I'm currently just outside of Seattle in Washington State. Currently in Redmond,
about 8
Washington.
hours behind us, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, we're in London, and it's probably even colder in Seattle than it is in London, I would imagine.
Possibly. I use Celsius over there, but it's like 40 something Fahrenheit here. It's pretty chilly.
Yeah, pretty cold over here. Though we did have some sunshine yesterday. Hopefully, a bit of March spring is just around the corner. We pray. So Tanner, really keen to get you on the pod today because I was, what I'm doing now is I'm kind of thinking, I haven't spoken to anybody who does this or no one has done that, and I realized I hadn't spoken to anybody I haven't spoken to any environment artists yet. I thought, right, Tanner, and my colleague mentioned you were a good guy. So thanks so much for coming on to speak with us. If you don't mind, Tanner, talk to us a little bit about your journey within the industry and how you've got to where you are today, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So, starting from the beginning, I remember being like this dorky, like 12, 13-year-old kid, and this game, LittleBigPlanet, came out, and I was like, whoa, this is like a game where I can just make stuff and I can play other things that other people made. And that game hooked me, and I was immediately into game development without even realizing it. I was just like making levels for this platformer game. So the next thing I know, once I'm in high school, I'm looking at colleges for game development. And I was already like a traditional artist. I could draw, I could paint, I could do like printmaking stuff. And so I knew I wanted to do some kind of art. And I went to Savannah College of Art and Design after I graduated from high school in Savannah, Georgia. Still have tons of friends from that school to this day that I chat with, and I see them all over the place in the industry. So I was like, okay, like this seemed like a great school to go to because I felt like every job I looked at, there were people from SCAD working there. And so I went, and it was great, and I learned environment art. It kind of clicked with me. I realized that a lot of the painting type stuff I liked doing was landscapes, and that was the equivalent in games. So yeah, I started 3D modeling and working in groups and stuff. After graduation, it took a bit of a while for me to find work. It took about 100 and I have a list of it. It was like 137 applications or something over the course of like a year and a half after graduation. And I remember the job I got wasn't even one that I actually applied to. It was it was through a recruiter, actually, through LinkedIn. And that was at 343 Industries. I remember that it was a SCAD alumni did a portfolio review of mine from 343, and he really liked my stuff. He gave me some critique. He told me, you should do a sci-fi piece. That's what we're looking for. So I made a sci-fi scene, which I think is still up on my portfolio. You can see it now. It might not last up there longer, though. I got some cool stuff going on. I might be taking that down. But yeah, he made a post on LinkedIn that was like, hey, we're looking for world builders. If anyone's interested, let me know. And I just made a comment like, oh, yeah, I'm so interested, And I heard nothing. And then randomly a month later, I get a call from like the hiring environment guy. And he's like, hey, is this Tanner? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, oh, okay. And he just asked me like 3 questions. Like, when can you start? And then next thing I knew, I was flying out across the country.
The dream.
Yeah.
That's cool. So 137 applications, you reckon, within 18 months?
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot. And, if we look at the industry now and what's going on right now, right, and the turmoil we're in, I'm wondering for those that are currently looking for work and trying to get into the industry, have you got any tips or hints that you could give?
I would say try to keep your portfolio up to date, especially if you're an artist. Something that stood out when I was taking interviews that has been mentioned to me multiple times was every time I posted something new, I would usually take off whatever was my like oldest project because I felt like it didn't represent me anymore.
Okay.
So I think like, you'll probably hear this elsewhere, but your portfolio is really only as good as the worst piece that's on it. Cause like, you know, it's on there. They can look at it. If they click on it, you're not going to be sitting there as they're looking through your portfolio to go, oh no, don't look at that. Don't look at that. Oh, this is old, whatever. So you should just take it off. I would only put your best work on there. You can get hired with only a couple of projects. And in addition to that, I think another thing that really helps is if there's a specific company you want to work at and you've applied to, I would maybe go on their LinkedIn and like go to the people page, and like search for recruiters or search for the hiring or the talent acquisition, whatever their title is, and just DM them and be like, "Hi, I applied. I have a couple questions about the role. I would like to know more," and that sort of thing. So I think just like getting, like make posts every time you make some new art, or like just try to get your name out there, have people see your stuff. Just get known is like the best way to find work, I think.
That's some brilliant advice there, and certainly keeping portfolios up to date is pretty consistent with the advice a lot of people have given on here. But actually, your point around removing old work and actually you're only as good as as your worst piece on there. Sorry, is that is unique actually, and I think that's a really really good bit of advice, and hopefully some people can take something from that. And I must apologise because we kind of went down a rabbit hole there, and we were talking through your journey, but it seemed like a perfect point to discuss. Sure. How you got in the industry, but you finally got there. You're at 343, and then what next? How did you progress?
Well, first of all, I think it's so easy to take a tangent because the journey in game dev is all over the place. But so like I went to 343. I was a contractor, and the initial job was supposed to just be world building, like placing assets in the scene, doing like vertex painting on objects and stuff, like basically assembling the environment with the objects that the creation team had already made. But they immediately put me to work doing 3D modeling, which wasn't even in the job description. And I learned so much even in the first week. I remember I made my first project and my lead was like, he's like, I'm sorry, but we got to redo this whole thing. And I was like, okay, I guess. And then he showed me, he's like, we're going to do this. These are the design principles you should follow, and gave me tons of advice. And
did you enjoy that?
Yes, it's great. Yeah, I'm totally cool with having somebody be like, we can easily make this better. Let me show you how. And that kind of stuff is super, super helpful. Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. And what happened next? What was the next gig?
So I was there for 1 year at 343, and it was about like 9 months into my 1 year contract, and I hadn't heard whether they were going to extend the contract or not. So I was like, okay, I got to start looking for work. I don't know if they're going to extend it or not, or if I'm going to get full-time, whatever. They did end up extending it, but by that point I found a full-time job elsewhere, which was at a VR company called Big Box VR. And I was working on a VR game that I was playing a ton of at the time on my Oculus Quest 2, which is Population 1. It's like a virtual reality battle royale game. Tons of fun. I was playing it like multiple hours every single night, and I saw they were hiring. And I got the job. It was really cool. It was super different working in virtual reality. But I remember at one point they got bought out by Meta, or formerly Facebook. It was Facebook at the time. Yeah. And I don't know, it kind of shifted away from this like small indie close knit feel to like a much more like big corporate. They started hiring a lot more. The funding was changing. The attitude of the managers was changing. And I wasn't feeling it too much anymore. And so then I had moved on I had a good friend from 343 who vouched for me at his company, which was Ascendant Studios. So after 1.5 years at Big Box, I left and I went to Ascendant to work on might be the first launched Unreal 5 game, or I think it's the first Unreal like 5.2.
Immortals.
The Immortals of Avium. Yep. And that was really cool. I mean, that technology is crazy. Like, all the new stuff in Unreal 5. I mean, like, years and years from now, I'm sure I'm going to like look back at this and be like hearing myself say how crazy Unreal 5 is, and we'll be like on Unreal 7, whatever. and I'd be like, oh, what a fool I was. But yeah, at least right now, that technology is pretty wild. It was a really cool project. You had like walls that were like flat walls in the environments that were like a million polygons, which is just unheard of in other games. Like, and it would run. So yeah, I really wanted to be on the project. I interviewed and they really liked me. I had a couple recommendations.
Awesome.
And
There's some
yeah, that
brilliant
job was
people at
great.
Ascendant. Absolutely brilliant people.
Oh, the talent was unbelievable there.
Yeah.
I mean, people from all walks of the game industry, absolute veterans, people from some of the most memorable franchises ever, like BioShock, Elder Scrolls. I mean, like some of the top dog developers on that game. Um, Unfortunately, after release, the game did not do so well, and I was laid off, and that was after another like year and a half at Ascendant. So in September of 2023, I was laid off, and it was about 3 months of being unemployed and just like rushing to find something. But then I was like, I was like settling for my applications. I was like, oh, I just need a job, whatever. But then Squanch opened up an application, and that I was like, this is the one. I was like, I want this job because I've played every single one of Squanch's games, and I was already a huge fan. And so I had a friend who worked there who was a SCAD graduate along with me, and I worked with him at 343 as well. And he put in a recommendation. I got interviewed the next day, and I had a job offer like 2 days later or something like that. And
Amazing.
that was
Amazing.
amazing. Yeah.
There's a lot in there. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, to tell me more about what you do in the day to day. But there's so much in your journey that I want to pick up on. I'm not going to be able to do all of it. But one thing that really strikes me, Tanner, is that you've fortunately worked with studios that produce games that you love. Like every time you talk about a different studio or a different place of work, like you become really, really animated.
Yeah.
Whether that's Ascendant or Squanch or whoever. That must be awesome, man, to be able to work at places that are making the games that you love.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I think that if a developer is like really happy about what he's making, then or they are making, then you'll make a much better game. I think that you hear all these stories of developers who are just super burnt out and like being worked to the bone, and I think that projects suffer from that kind of stuff. Whereas if you have, you give people enough time, and if there are people who are really happy about the project they're working on, they're going to make something better. And it really stands out.
Yeah,
Like
I
Baldur's Gate
agree.
3, I remember like they don't have like any like it was like any like investors or anything. It was like just an all like in-house indie game, and it's like it was game of the year. It's like that's like game of the decade right there. And
And
like the employees are always so happy. I see them all posting.
that's where Immortals struggled a little bit, right? With their release date just shortly after Baldur's Gate 3. And
Yes.
I think there was an
Yeah.
interview with Brett Robbins this week actually that said, we got screwed a bit there. But actually over the kind of past few months, sales have picked up, and actually they're a little bit more on track now, which is great to hear.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I mean, I loved my time at Ascendant, and I don't like have any ill will towards any of my old coworkers. They were all amazing people.
Yeah, that's cool. And I want to ask you about something else, Tanner, that you mentioned. You spoke about at college. You started to really specialize super early with environment art, and you kind of found that at college and loved it. For you, do you think that's your path now? Are you going to stick within that niche, or is there anything else you'd like to maybe experience in the future?
I definitely will stay with environment art for like a good long while, but I could see myself getting into some kind of character art or maybe 3D animation or something.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Watch this space, eh?
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of leads me nicely on to what an environment artist actually does. So, if you don't mind, Tanner, talk us through your day to day and talk us through some of your roles and responsibility currently at Squanch.
Yeah, so if I'm lucky at all of these jobs, sometimes I'll get handed a beautiful painting by the concept team, and they'll be like, "Hey, we want you to make this," and it will be usually of a room or of a space, something playable that the player can walk around in or interact with. So basically, everything you see in the game that is not a character or some sort of flashy magical particle effect or gunshot or whatever, that is something made by the environment artist. So all of the buildings, all of the roads, cars, trees, rocks, all that stuff, that is the type of thing that we make.
Brilliant. And I mean, I could tell by the way you talk about it, but you seem to love what you do.
I absolutely love it. Yeah, it's great. 99% of my job starts with opening up a 3D program and pressing the button that spawns a cube and then doing something with that cube. Sometimes we get a little spicy and it's a sphere or a cylinder.
On a crazy day.
Yeah.
So Tanner, if we go back to kind of pre-college, and what I'm thinking here is, I often personally get asked, like, my son or like my daughter wants to get into video games, what do you recommend? So so if you were to speak to a 15, 16, 17-year-old about to go to college or in college and they want to follow your path, what's some advice you would give to them? Do they need to start ensuring that, they're doing some graphic design, UX design, art, what's the best way to go about it?
I think step one is just, do you love video games? You have to really love video games to want to do this job. Not just playing them, but I think you have to have kind of an appreciation for what certain video games do differently than others, which I think is what made games like LittleBigPlanet stand out so much for me when I was that age. The fact that it wasn't just another Call of Duty shooter game, which I love Call of Duty, just to throw that out there. It was just something super unique, and that kind of inspired me. So I think figuring out what are the games that inspire you, that are making you feel like I want to do this as a job. What is it about these games that make me feel inspired? The other game that had a huge impact on me, and it was the reason I specifically wanted to be an artist, was the game Journey by That Game Company.
Yeah,
I remember you've played that one?
I haven't played that game, but we work with TGC. Yeah.
Okay.
Finn's played that.
It's beautiful. I mean, it's like, it was the first time where I played a game and I thought games are art. They're not just like, it's not like, I don't know. It really had a big impact on me when there's a scene where you're like sliding down this big sand hill and it's like sunset and the sand is all glistening and everything. And the music was so beautiful. And it was just crazy. That hit me. I think like finding that for yourself is really important. Like, maybe you hear a beautiful score in a song and you're like, wow, I can make music for games. Or maybe you see like some really cool effect in like a fighting game or something. And you're like, oh, I want to do particle effects. I want to be, an animator or whatever it is. You don't even have to know what that thing is right now, but just having that feeling of like, I want to contribute to what is on the screen in some capacity, I think is a good starting point. I didn't figure out exactly that it was environment art I wanted to do until I was in college and actually making 3D. And it was kind of introduced to me. Yeah.
But I think that a couple of things on that. I don't think it's a coincidence that you've ended up working on games that you love, because that genuine passion is going to appeal to hiring managers and studios, right? And I think that's a really, really pertinent piece of advice. And I was on a Zoom earlier with someone who was asking me for some advice about, what route they should go down in the gaming industry. And they were kind of on the periphery. And first question is, what do you love doing? And that's got to be the first question, right? Because if you're going to go to work for 50, 60 hours a week, if not more sometimes, you might as well enjoy it, is what I think anyway.
Yep, so absolutely.
That's awesome advice. So Tanner, I just want to finish up with, and obviously you're an avid gamer, so I would love to know if there's anything coming up in the next few months that you're really looking forward to getting your hands on. If there are anything,
my gosh,
releases
Paper Mario,
this year that you're hotly anticipating? Probably a big list, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely Thousand Year Door remake. I am like, my GameCube is literally sitting right behind me. Actually, I'm like dying to play that remake. And Final Fantasy Rebirth was a pretty cool one to come out. So yeah, it's a good year for RPGs. We just had Baldur's Gate come out as well, and the new Yakuza Like a Dragon came out. There's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's too much for me to play all of it. And this is my favourite question. I'm just building out my library, but I'm never going to get through anything. Never going to get through everything, but there we go. Tanner, thank you so much for your time today, man. Like, you've been awesome. I've really, really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope that the viewers and listeners have learned a little bit about the role of an environment artist and maybe picked up some instant tips to get into the industry. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Tanner, all the best, and hopefully I'll speak to you soon.
Yeah, catch you later.
Thanks, mate.